Hey guys, let's talk about one of your short stories, Hills Like White Elephants. This is by Ernest Hemingway, and it's one of my favorites for several reasons. So as we go through these notes, I'm going to cover three different things, all of which you can use or think about when you're writing an analysis of a short story. So or at least you can, when you're allowed to include research. So first background, second technique, and then third, some literary devices that the author uses. All right, so let's talk about background first. This is a picture of Ernest Hemingway, our author. This is later in his life. Let me tell you a little bit about the time period in which he was writing and about the man himself. First, the story is post-World War I. Remember that World War I was a war unlike anything we had ever seen before. In fact, it was called the Great War, or the War to End All Wars. This, of course, is before we knew that atrocities like World War II could even happen. That was unimaginable. All right, so World War I was shocking and dramatic worldwide, and people who were involved had a difficult time readjusting to life and society when they returned. So a lot of literature written in the 1920s, we call this modernist literature, deals with themes that authors were not using in the past, themes of fragmentation, isolation, alienation, meaning that they were just having a hard time connecting with people and with society in general. Now, in the United States, the 20s was really a time of excess. You've heard it called the Roaring 20s. There was just a lot of sudden prosperity, a lot of partying, a lot of drinking to excess. If you've read The Great Gatsby, that is this time period too. But there's a different side to the 1920s that literature reveals to us as well. And that is the plight of what we call the lost generation. And all of these things I've just talked about, World War I, the aftermath, the excess, are part of what we call the lost generation. This is a term coined by Gertrude Stein, another author and activist during this time period. And it really referred to two things. One, it referred to the number of men who were lost during World War I, that this whole generation of men died on the battlefield, or if they survived the battlefield, when they came back, they were unalterably changed. They were different men than when they went to war. It also refers to this set of artists and writers who were looking for a way to reconnect, and were just having a hard time doing that. Many of these artists during the Lost Generation, or who were part of the Lost Generation, were expatriates, meaning they left the United States and they settled in Europe, mostly in Paris, and they kind of had their own community. Ernest Hemingway, as I mentioned, was one of these. He was a journalist and an ambulance driver during World War I. So he is kind of the perfect example of this lost generation, this artist who was struggling, not financially. He was doing very well. He was a very popular author, but struggling in his search for meaning in anything he saw in life. And that's what a lot of his literature is about. People who were just searching for meaning and time again failing to find it. All right, so that's background. Let's look at technique. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the iceberg theory. And this was a term coined by Hemingway himself to describe the way he wrote. Now, this picture that you see, this iceberg, where normally you would just see the top of it above the water level, but there's this huge section of it that we don't see that's under the water level. And I'm going to read you a quote and then talk about what Hemingway means by the iceberg theory. All right, so he says, if a writer of prose knows enough of what he is writing about, he may admit things he knows, and the reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. A writer who omits things because he does not know them only makes hollow places in his writing. All right, so that sounds kind of complex. What he's saying is when he's writing, he's going to leave a lot of stuff out that he thinks that the reader can figure out. If the reader is worldly, if the reader is savvy, then he doesn't need to add in a lot of extra words. He writes in a way that is really pared down, stripped to the essentials. And I think Hills Like White Elephants is a perfect example of this, because there's so much about this couple and this relationship that we don't know, and yet when we hear their words, when we overhear their conversation, we know exactly what they're talking about. So in this story, we're kind of eavesdropping, and it's a good example of this iceberg theory. There's more underneath the surface that we can figure out that we don't have to see. And yet there's also a lot that we don't know and can't figure out. We don't know the conclusion of this story. All right, let's talk about a different technique, and that is diction. Now, diction simply means, or let me take one step back and say that part of the iceberg technique is going to be about syntax. And I didn't include a slide about this. I'm sorry, it just kind of occurred to me to add this in. But syntax is the way you shape your sentences. And you'll notice that Hemingway, again, he strips his sentences down to the essentials. There's not a lot of extra wording. They're mostly very simple sentences. All right, and added to that is diction. And diction means the word choice of the author. And the word choice in this story, what is important is the white elephants. So we begin with the title, Hills Like White Elephants, and then we see Jig talking to the American, or we hear Jig talking to the American, and she notes that the hills look like white elephants. Now, why are they having this conversation? Why is the term white elephants part of the title? Title's always important. This opening conversation is important, even though it seems just like it's small talk. So you might have heard of something called a white elephant party or a white elephant gift exchange. And what that is, you know, a Christmas party where you give a white elephant gift. It's a party in which you give people things that are silly, kind of useless, things that aren't usually gifts. So I looked up and I just pasted a definition right in here for you. A white elephant, what Hemingway is talking about, is a possession that is useless or troublesome, especially one that is expensive to maintain or difficult to dispose of. Now I want you to take a minute to think about that. Why would Hemingway include this idea of a white elephant in this story that is about abortion? So the hills look like white elephants, but there's something else that he is calling a white elephant. Or to be more exact, there's something that the man, the American, is calling a white elephant in this story, and that is the baby. White elephant gifts might include if somebody, I don't know, gave you a puppy that you weren't expecting or you didn't necessarily want. Do you love dogs? Yes, maybe, but are you prepared to have a dog in your dorm room? Are you prepared for the expense of a vet, for the expense of feeding it, for the time of taking care of it and training it? Perhaps not. So he's taking this idea of a white elephant, something that is troublesome, expensive, that isn't bad in and of itself, but you don't necessarily want, and he's applying that term to this baby. The man, the American, is looking at this child that they are going to have, that he does not want to have, as a nuisance. So this term that he chooses is very important symbolically in this story. Now, the woman clearly feels a little bit differently. Jig feels differently. She's not sure she wants to go through with this, but the man is clearly ready to dispose of what he sees of as a white elephant. All right, so let's look at some literary devices now. I gave you some notes on setting, and I want to talk a little bit about the importance of setting, and especially something that I don't believe was included in those notes. So setting, you're talking about two things, the time and the place. And there's a third thing that I'm going to add later. So the time here is the Roaring Twenties. This story was published in 1927. And again, it's very indicative of this lifestyle that a lot of these expatriates, a lot of the lost generation had, in which they were wandering and just having a good time. They weren't focused on responsibilities, getting married, having children, having a career, settling down, because they didn't see or find meaning in those things. Since they're having a hard time finding meaning, they just wander, and the American wants this to continue, whereas Jig, it seems like, feels that this is something significant, this is something meaningful for her personally and for their relationship. So the fact that it's taking place in the 20s is important in several ways. One, it tells you something about these characters, the lifestyle that they've been living, their kind of nomadic experience. And it also tells you something about the way abortion would be viewed at this time. At this time, it's illegal. And it's not something that people take as lightly as they may do now. The American keeps saying it's not a big deal, they just let the air in. It's, and then we can go on, move on, and be happy. But Jig clearly, again, does not feel the same way. All right, so that's the time, which we call the temporal setting. Place is called the spatial setting. It's the space where this takes place. And it's taking place in a remote train station in Spain. And you see that this is what we call a liminal space. I haven't talked about liminal spaces in this class, but a liminal space is a place or a time of transition. If you want to kind of simplify the idea, think of a garage attached to a house. That area of a garage is two places and neither places at once. It's not inside the house, but it's also not outside. It is a liminal space. And this couple is existing at this moment in a liminal space, in a transition, meaning they're parents, but they're not. They have a settled relationship, but they don't. And the train station is a symbol for that, because a train station is a place where you transition. You're leaving one place, you're no longer there, but you're also not in the next place either. So the setting here, in several ways, is symbolic of their relationship. This time of excess, this place and time of transition are very important for this couple. And it's important that we never see them leave the train station. We don't see them arrive, so we don't know much about their lives before they get to this place, and we don't know what decision they make. We don't know the conclusion. We don't know what happens. Do they stay together? Does Jig agree to get an abortion? Does the American take responsibility? Does he convince her? We just don't know at this point. All right, there's a third aspect of setting that I'm going to add in here, and that is atmosphere. Whereas spatial and temporal setting are facts. It takes place at this time, in this place. Atmosphere is more of an emotion word. Atmosphere is talking about the feeling of a story. And whether you're aware of this or not, any television show, any song, any movie, any book, any story is going to build an atmosphere. It has a specific feeling about it. And to use an example outside of this story, I always think of this couple that I babysat for in high school. One was an engineer, the other one was a biochemist, and they had 3 kids. And we were talking about what I would read them as like bedtime stories. And I remember that Harry Potter had recently come out, and they were talking about one of their kids liking Harry Potter, and the mother said, "I don't get it. It's just too weird. I just don't like it." So because she was just very black and white, very factually minded, she didn't like the atmosphere of a fantasy story. It just wasn't comfortable for her. She did not enjoy it. She liked to read the paper, and she liked to read biographies and memoirs and Bible study type things. She didn't like fantasy. She liked realism, whereas I love fantasy books, and I'm not likely to read the paper, to be honest. So the atmosphere is an emotion word. It's how the story feels, and there are a lot of things that go into this. And I would say that the atmosphere of the story is uncomfortable, that it is oppressive. Both of those to me seem to fit Hills Like White Elephants. And let me tell you a couple of things that lead me to that conclusion. One, the sun is beating down. It's a hot day. As you know, if you've spent any time in the summer in the Southeast, the heat can be oppressive. It can be stifling. It makes you tired. It makes you irritable. It makes you physically uncomfortable. And we see that here in the story. 2, we see some discomfort in the fact that Jig is dependent on the American in this story. She can't order for herself because she doesn't know the language, so she kind of has to agree to get whatever drink that the American orders. And we see this as a symbol for her being dependent on him in other ways too. And especially as 21st century readers, that likely makes us a little uncomfortable. 3, we know that they're talking about something incredibly personal, and we see the American's influence over Jig when he tells her, "You can have anything you want in the world if we get rid of this baby. I'll always love you. We just need to get rid of this child, and then everything will go back to normal. We can be happy." And we see, or we feel uncomfortable with that because we know that he's exerting this pressure on Jig, and Jig isn't quite strong enough to stand up to it. She clearly does not want to go through with this surgery, but she never at any point says, "Look, I'm not going to do this. This is not something I want to do." And 4, I think we feel a little bit uncomfortable in this story because Hemingway puts us in the role of an eavesdropper. Now, they would assume, or he leads us to believe, that nobody at this train station can understand the conversation that they're having because they're not using the word abortion. And 2, they're in the middle of Spain, and the American has already shown us that he has to order for Jig in Spanish. But we, the reader, can understand what they're saying. We pick up on the clues, the hints that the American and Jig are sprinkling through their conversation, even though that missing bit of diction, that word abortion, is absent, purposefully absent in this story. So the atmosphere, this discomfort that we feel, this oppression that we feel, is coming from things like the weather, the diction that he's using, that he's not using, the role the reader is forced into. All these little things combine to make us feel something about this story. I'm guessing not a lot of you like this story, and I'm also going to guess that it's because of the atmosphere that Hemingway creates. He doesn't want you to feel comfortable. He doesn't want you to know what happens at the end. He doesn't want to give you that resolution, and he doesn't, and that is very indicative for him of what the Lost Generation is about, that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what to anticipate, and we're uncomfortable with that idea. All right, so that is Hills Like White Elephants. Feel free to shoot me any questions you have about it. Have a great day.